Hey there, I'm Pseudo. This is the long time coming discussion of Warrior. We're going to be talking about Core Warrior today. I have with me my friend and veteran PvP player, Juice. Say hi, Juice. Or
Hello,
say
hello.
something. Perfect. Alright. You've played a fair bit of Guild Wars 2 competitive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, probably since the vanilla days.
We've both been around a bit. Warrior, theory crafting, and build crafting is my passion. I'm clearly not the best player, usually gold 3, plat 1, but I do enjoy it a lot, and I spend a lot of my free time in the build editor, so I wrote a thing. It's a bit long, but for people who hate reading, we were going to have the formal edited video coming soon, but we thought we'd get the podcast done a little bit as a refresher to myself while I'm editing that video. Anyway, let's dive right into it. So, we've talked about this a lot at length before. Warrior and warrior balance and game balance in general. And originally I set out when I was doing the core project is what everybody wanted to call it. I wanted to look at every class pre End of Dragon's release and see how the core, ranger, warrior, guardian classes were balanced. But to do that, we kind of needed to define what balance meant first. This is something that came up in our friend group a lot when we were talking about this, and sort of what balance means first across classes and then within a class. So what I did with this assessment is I started with the top-down look at all of the classes, and a couple disclaimers. We'll say these as we're going. I can't cover everything that's covered in the paper, but not every class needs to be equally good at doing everything in the game, obviously. Like, Guardians were the original, in quotes, heal spec, if there was going to be one, or Guardian spec, that guard that's in the name. Rangers have Longbow, they're the OG range spec and pet spec. Mesmers were aids, but everyone had, their own thing, and obviously Warriors didn't need clones to make it balanced, or Rangers didn't need Aegis, it's just how things were built. But within, it basically what balance means is the class sort of fair in a sense? Is it, good at some things and bad at other things, whether you're looking at competitive PvP or world versus world or PvE or whatever it is? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And for Warrior, it was the original Bruiser. It was the OG, it has a lot of health. Revenant wasn't in the game yet. Guardian still had low health pools if you could get to that. So it was the tank. And sort of the problem with that, as the game goes on, is that Warrior then becomes, the specializations have their own role. They all have their own role. And for this project, we're acknowledging that specializations exist, but we can't really dive into them, as you sort of see here as we're going through it. This is just about core. So what does that mean when a class is balanced, right? It means that it does its thing, how Warrior originally tanked, and then it also means that within the class, once you dive into it, there are options, right? You look at the individual trait lines. They're good at something, Strength is theoretically the power line. Discipline is theoretically the utility line, much the way Arcane is for Elementalist. Tactics is theoretically the healing line, even though it kind of really doesn't do that, and we'll talk about what that means. So that's sort of what we're looking at when we're talking about balance here. So as far as, the color coding for this actual project goes, there's different color codes if you're following along with the document, which I will have linked below, and I highly recommend you doing. It'll alleviate a little bit of confusion if you're a build nerd like I am. And if you've made it this far into the video, you probably do actually want to have this discussion, so I'd go to the little color coding things and just sort of see what they mean. Basically, just because something is good in PvE doesn't mean, at least for our purposes, or meta overall, doesn't mean it's bad in PvP or bad in world versus world. If it's good in PvE, it's largely good everywhere. If it's good in PvP, it's also largely good in world versus world. It's sort of, we got to go with the top-down assessment because there was no way to color code it as I was going through otherwise. So that's a thing. The biggest problem that I came across, well, I guess we'll get into that a little bit later. So, Juice, how does Warrior play right now? I've talked a little bit too much. How would you say, at least from your more recent experience, how does Warrior play in the game? In competitive, let's start there, because that's your forte. Going to assume Juice died.
my bad. My microphone was accidentally muted. So from a competitive standpoint, Warrior has always been the designated side noter. At the very least, if you had one on your team, you always wanted to either put him on home node or set him on far. He was basically the 1vx puppet of every single team. Now, as time progressed, other classes have gotten significantly better at doing that and significantly better at surviving, something that Warrior is starting to lack.
I mean, what I do want to acknowledge, and to your point, we've talked about this and complained about this quite a bit, in my friend group. What I love is obviously balance patches, and what we haven't gotten for the last year and a half is balance patches. And I do want to acknowledge right up front the very real reality of COVID. I do think that ANET did have different balance plans planned for the game. I don't think that Calicohan would have come out and said on his streams twice that they were wanting to do balance patches at the fastest every 2 weeks, possibly even faster, if they didn't actually intend that pre-COVID. So they did the one big sweeping nerf patch that really dumpstered a lot of Warrior stuff, because Warrior didn't really have much, and then when they nerfed the shout trait following that, it really didn't have anything. So kind of as you were saying, like, you can use aggressive language here. It sucks. Warrior's in a really bad place balance-wise right now. Like, it's not the best in PvE. It's still fine, but that's because Berserker F1, like, Decapitate is just a rotation in and of itself, which, again, may be fun to some people and is still good, but it's not good balance. And that sort of leads into the first thing we need to talk about is defining, like, what balance means. So balance, in terms that at least that we're talking about it and where I bring up this discussion, is just because something is balanced does not mean that it's either, or does not mean or exclude the fact that it's either good or fun. Something can be good or fun or not good or fun, independent of whether or not it's balanced. All the classes right now in PvE do pretty much the same. They've gotten to a point where everything does pretty much the same amount of damage. Like, some things clearly do more than others, some things do way too much damage while being support classes like Selly Revenant, but that's more down to a gear issue, right? There's obviously ways to fix that in the short and long term, but that's clearly not what ANET's priority has been. And going back to the COVID thing, I completely understand again, I want to put this disclaimer up front, being in Get End of Dragons out so we can have jobs in the future and have a game is not a bad mode to be in. I do acknowledge that. It sucks for balance nerds like me and people who play the game and, like, really are enthusiastic about balance changes, but yeah, I would rather have a good expansion, or at least an exciting expansion, failing that, than nothing at all and consistent balance patches. So the problem with Warrior is it's both good. You would say it's okay in PvP. It's not the best. It still does its side node thing fine, but there are definitely other classes partially because we haven't gotten a balance patch for a year and a half, and partially because that's just how the game has evolved and how Warrior mechanics have evolved. There's other things that do its job better, you would say, right? Like Core Necromancer and whatnot.
I would definitely say that the meta now compared to back in the day has definitely changed significantly. A while back, you can definitely see Warrior's presence in a game, especially when it was the Guardian, Firebrand Scourge meta. They were still very strong back then. Now things have kind of changed. And as I said, a lot of other classes have better methods than Warrior of surviving. I feel like that's kind of Warrior's downside right now. It's just survivability. I mentioned to you before, I feel like Warrior is still good if you look at it from a ranked perspective, because they can still fulfill the exact same role that any of the classes can do. And because it's ranked, the coordination of each individual player is not there, right? So it's not as coordinated as team play. So they can still work very well in PvP. It's just it comes down to the natural skill level of the player. And as I said, I think Warrior, it's not necessarily a hard class to jump into, but it's definitely one of the harder classes to really master. There's definitely a skill difference between a person that has 100 hours in Warriors versus 1,000 hours in Warrior. So it's a day and night difference.
Well, part of that difference is I mean, the main point of my paper, when I was looking at all of the different traits, all of the different, utility skills, healing skills, honestly, as far as healing skills, Warrior has some of the best, especially now that they've made mending and physical skill, and because it's just ridiculous compared to the other ones. Back in the day, it was healing signet, but it has decent elite skills as it is. It has good healing skills. Its utility skills are really largely bad, except for 3 of them that just like dominate everything. And that's part of the problem. You'll see that trend a lot with Warrior, and sort of going on Juice's point, I feel like, at least from playing a lot of Warrior recently and from theory crafting it for 5-6 years, the discipline trait line, like especially fast hands, this is something that came up when we were originally, talking about Warrior, talking about why it feels kind of poop to play. This trait line is, and I struggled to find another one that was of equivalent power, right? But the discipline trait line is far and away the most broken thing I have ever seen in any kind of like option given theory crafting, build crafting scenario, whether it's Diablo, whether it's, a largely single player game like Diablo, whether it's this, whether it's other games like League of Legends that you can choose what you spec into. Discipline is busted. The reason discipline is busted is not just because certain traits are good, but because it is basically required on every single build in every single game mode forever. And the reason being, the primary reason being, is either, for PvP in World versus World, basically fast hands makes the class playable. And whether, sort of what Juice was talking about, whether you're utilizing that to your fullest or not, largely defines whether or not the Warrior has, those extra hours in it, whether they can weapon swap on a 5-second basis, which is really, it's much faster playstyle, but it's necessary in order to play the class effectively.
It's just, in general, I feel like Warrior compared to other classes, now every class has their own unique niche, but Warrior definitely has those internal cooldowns that are not really, they're not present in all classes, and it really takes a lot of time to practice on. I guess another class that is kind of similar in terms of like having small inner cooldowns that you need to keep track of would be like something like Thief 2. Yeah, I'd say both of these classes are quite difficult to play mechanically at the high ceiling.
Well, at least as far as Warrior gameplay goes, a lot of it's like, you start in one weapon set, you use a couple of things, you swap. You can even, throw an axe and weapon swap before it hits them, so that's off cooldown. And then you get on the node, you do your couple big hitting skills, you charge through them with the Greatsword 3, which is an evade, and then you swap back to the other thing, and then you use those for couple cooldowns and you swap back. Effectively, fast hands gives Warrior, it has given Warrior through the entirety of its history, love it or hate that playstyle, it's given it as many buttons as the other classes sort of evolved to have, right? Necros have their core and Reaper Shroud and Scourge skills, Mirages have their shatters, Guardians have, holy crap, everything, especially with Firebrand. Revenants, I would say, is at least because I don't play a lot of Thief, I would say Revenant is probably the closest analog I could come to the Warrior playstyle, mostly because of the unswap sigil thing. So for those of you that don't know, Warrior has the ability, just like Revenant. I can't talk today. I don't know why I picked today to do the podcast. Revenant has the ability to utilize 4 unswap sigils just like Warrior does. And the way it does that is you equip 4 of them, and then you legend swap, triggering the 4 you have equipped, and then you weapon swap, triggering the last 2. Or the 2 you have equipped, sorry. So it goes 2-2, and Warrior does the same thing essentially, but it's on a shorter cooldown basis. So you equip 4 unswap sigils, and you can, as long as they have 10-second cooldowns, there was like one for a nanosecond that had a 20-second cooldown in PvP. But as long as they have 10-second cooldowns, you can trigger all of those, because it's 10 seconds before they can, be triggered again with fast hands. So that's kind of something that it's been balanced around, just having more buttons and having its weapons faster for a really long time. And without fast hands, the class kind of becomes unplayable. So, excluding the fact that you really don't go into your off weapon set in PvE because Berserker is stupid, and you just mash F1, which is a separate reason why Warrior balance is lazy and bad, but it's I don't know. it's a love-hate relationship, right? And it's something that I honestly feel very strongly that after looking at Warrior and after doing this teardown and after thinking about this for, writing this thing for like 3 months, it's I don't think the way to fix it is to remove fast hands. I honestly think the way to fix it is to make fast hands baseline. And I know that's a controversial opinion, and the 3 people watching this will probably rage down in the comments like, no, that would make Warrior OP. And I really, like, would it though? Because they did the same thing for Illusionary Persona for Mesmer, pre-Heart of Thorns. And fast hands is already on every single Warrior build in the game. So it really wouldn't change how any of those builds play. What it would do is it would let you take like discipline and strength, or strength and tactics, or whatever you wanted to do without fundamentally giving up the Warrior playstyle. That is, like, I would say fast hands honestly has supplanted the adrenaline mechanic, like, for things that define the Warrior playstyle. I don't know how you feel about that.
To some degree, that's true. I think maybe this is just provide me with some information, because I've been a little bit out of the loop for Bladesworn. For them, do you still take tactics? Because I've seen like a bunch of meme like builds. It doesn't really seem that you'd really need tactics, but would it still probably use tactics just because of burst mastery?
So like, oh, you mean so burst mastery is in?
It's in tactics.
No, it's in discipline. Are you saying would they still use discipline?
Oh, discipline, yeah.
Because people are using the tactics line for the shouts. Bladesworn is something I wanted to talk about a little bit later, but I guess we can bring it up a little bit now. So like, Bladesworn is the only hope I have for Bladesworn is, I don't know. I'm really excited for it. I want to say that. I think the concept is really cool. I think the offhand weapon's really bad and won't be used in a lot of scenarios, but that's a separate issue. The problem I have with Bladesworn is not that it exists, it's that it's clearly existed in some form or another in whatever dev's mind has been helming Warrior balance for like the last, I want to say at least 3-4 years. Because when I was doing this review, I went back and looked at when ammunition was first introduced on Warrior, and it was first introduced on those physical skills, right? Like throw bolas, kick, tragically Bull's Charge didn't get ammunition, but it's back when they did that, soon after I think they added it to Shake It Off as well. And Shake It Off having ammunition, I think, has something that has really steered Warrior development for a really long time, and sort of prevented them from nerfing or balancing, or having to balance a lot of the things on Warrior. It's like you don't have to balance Warrior because it has discipline and fast hands and Shake It Off. You just have to balance those 3 things because those are what define it. Like if they took Shake It Off of Warrior, it wouldn't be playable because it wouldn't have 2 stun breaks. If they took fast hands off Warrior, it wouldn't be playable because it doesn't have enough buttons to push. It just doesn't. So with Bladesworn, because the gun saber has ammunition, and because a lot of the armaments have ammunition, I've seen a lot of people taking, you said mistakenly both tactics and discipline, but like, I really don't know. A lot of the stuff in both betas for Bladesworn has been bugged. Burst Mastery just didn't work right. It didn't actually refund you flow when you used a burst skill, because flow isn't actually consumed when you use a burst skill. So I don't know if that's working as intended or not. Flow is consumed when you're charging a burst skill for Bladesworn. When you're like loading the bullets, right? The bullets are actually what's consumed when you use like the slashes. So I genuinely don't know. Burst Mastery has clearly been a big part of PvP playstyle, as with fast hands, as with honestly Warrior's Sprint. Is also a really overpowered trait, especially compared to the other 2 options you can take. So Discipline's just a great trait line. I really don't know if it's going to take Discipline or not, though, because I think the answer, honestly, Juice, I've been mulling this around in my head a lot, and I think the answer is probably yes, just because Fast Hands is stupid, right? Like, why wouldn't you take that, If you could be an Elementalist with 5-second attunement swaps, why wouldn't you take that trait line? You know what I mean?
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious because I was out of the loop for the new spec, so I wasn't sure exactly what people have been testing out. I would feel like, at least just from seeing some meme builds, I feel like that might be the one specialization that doesn't use it, based off just the idea of it. Obviously, I haven't seen any numbers.
Right.
I don't know anything. I don't know anything about it. You know, I was mostly looking at Ranger and Guardian because that's what I play mostly.
Oh, I understand. And honestly, that's, I think, the biggest reason they haven't changed Discipline recently is because Bladesworn is coming. I think it's, they haven't changed a lot of the stuff on Warrior and the other classes because they're playable in PvE, PvP, and World versus World. They're not the best, but Warrior is playable in all of those game modes. It has its, bubble roll in World versus World. It has its side node-ish capability in PvP, and if you go full Zerk, it can do some sick damage with the offhand axe. Like, it's got its utility. It's just not well balanced, because the options to the things that are viable that you take in those game modes, including Discipline and including Strength, also, honestly, Strength's pretty overpowered, are bad. So I don't know how Bladesworn's gonna play. I really don't. I'm really excited for ANET to get back to the period of actually balancing things on Warrior, and the game in general, not just Warrior, I should say, because I do have lots of other builds and lots of other classes. But it's interesting, right? So I don't know. Like, you look at tactics here. Let's go to it. The one trait in tactics that actually makes it sort of, the meme builds people were using it for that you were talking about was the Vigorous Shouts trait, where you take, nothing but shouts and you just reload them with the elite skill and you just, spam that over and over, and you just heal yourself and heal the team. And this is, it's tough, right? Because you don't want to give, if you're ANET, right, and it's 2 years out from End of Dragons and Warrior's going to have ammunition, you don't want to give them, like, a buttload of ammunition things that are balanced and then take those things away and have Berserker and Spellbreaker fall off precipitously when Bladesworn comes out. But on the offhand, I almost feel like that's what they did, just unintentionally, right? Because Berserker's my favorite class in the game. It's not the best, clearly, but it's my favorite one to theorycraft on. And I would say it's arguably the worst. You mentioned it before the stream. Longbow's my favorite weapon, and it sucks. It's probably the worst weapon in the game, if not offhand sword on Warrior, which is another option, which also sucks. So, when Cal Kohan, this is something that frustrated me a little bit, was talking with Mighty Teapot, or pre-Mighty Teapot, was the first balance stream, where Warrior has all of these weapons and options, and each one has sort of the space that it occupies. Yeah, they do, but a lot of them are bad. Right? Like, can you think of another weapon besides... Let's say Greatsword and Shield are the ones you can't pick. What are the other good weapons on Warrior for PvP?
That depends what kind of build you want to run. There's meme builds with Gunzerker builds out there that one-shot people.
Yeah, it's true. Rifle does do damage.
Obviously, if you're playing... And you know what the funny thing is? I feel like for ranked alone, playing very high risk, high reward has always been... I feel like, me personally, memeing, like, I think one full season as, like, Sikkim Ranger, I think, that carried me pretty high. But, I think that would probably be the next best answer. Because if you can't side note with Greatsword and, let's say, Sword Shield or Dagger Shield if you're running Spellbreaker, I don't know, you'd have to go high risk, high reward, just run, gun. That's it.
Yeah, there's rifles
are
alright.
Axes
are still alright.
Axes are still decent too, but I can't really think of anything else.
I mean, the cool thing about the main hand axe, this is just getting into theory crafting, which I do want to steer away from, but the cool thing about main hand axe is it does have ammunition, and I'm really hoping that if they are only going to focus, like Calcohan said they were pretty much on their extra live stream on End of Dragon stuff going forward in balance, I hope they give more stuff ammunition. I really do. I hope, if they have to cut the damage in half or the duration in half for some of these things, that's fine. But if they're gonna balance it around stuff having ammunition and working with Bladesworn, they gotta give it to more stuff, like main hand sword. Like, what are the options here? Because theoretically Bladesworn's got offhand pistol, right? This is getting way out of our core discussion, but what do you run with that? You run sword, mace, or axe. Which of those is good?
It depends on the damage profile. I can see sword being really good for mobility, but
yeah, you need the mobility because you don't have the greatsword anymore.
Yeah, it's a tough conversation.
It's such a weird, we'll see how it shakes out. Like, so it goes to what you were saying. Nothing's solidified because A, they're changing things between betas, and B, we haven't had time for the community to just throw themselves at the wall and find out what's the best. But I don't know. As far as Core Warrior goes back, heading back to that, our actual topic of discussion. So, as far as this went, looking at strength and traits and everything else, healing skills, good job. Elite skills, good job. Utility skills, terrible job, because 2 of them are just the worst in the game. And one of which, in the same category, is arguably the best in the game, Shake It Off, which is ridiculous. It does everything. Let's look at this. It does stun breaks allies, it cleanses allies, it hits 5 things, it heals you if you trade it. It has the same cooldown as Twist of Fate. Like, it's silly. And this is the main problem that I have with Warrior, is it seems to be balanced around just like 4 things. And granted, there are other things on other classes that you do have to acknowledge that do define the playstyle, and I acknowledge this very much in the paper. Like Blink on Mesmer, or the Shadow Step. What's it called on Thief? The literal thing that's just called Shadow Step? Nope. Yeah, it's literally called Shadow Step and Shadow Return.
Shadow Step.
Like, those things are not bad things to exist. Like, I'd like to complain about Firebrand a lot, because it is I think it is still really, really strong, especially in World vs. World, and just does everything. If I had my way, you'd have to spec into a book, or give, all of your traits up to take all 3 books. But it does its thing, right? It does its World vs. World thing. They've managed to nerf it enough in PvP, so it's not a thing in PvP anymore, and it's got its role. Warrior is balanced around a similar few things, be it fast hands, Shake It Off, and really the strength line existing in addition to discipline right now, and nothing else. And like, I guess the shout trait and tactics, because it's still really, really good. Everything else in tactics is kind of mediocre, but that one trait is very good. And that one trait makes a lot of, at least for the time, or back in the day before they nerfed everything, meme builds were viable. There was healing a warrior in PvP, and that was cool. And then they took the healing amulet out, and they nerfed everything. So I don't know. I really don't know how it's going to play out with Bladesworn. I really don't know how it's going to play out going forward. Anybody in ANET Power, if you're listening to this, please more frequent balance patches, or at least transparency with what's going on. Don't be afraid to listen to community feedback. I do want to foster positive discussion with this. I don't want to just shit on it and be like, Warrior's bad. That's why, mostly in this paper, I do outline a lot of actionable fixes for how things could be made to be balanced, both within trait lines and between trait lines, to give them some viability. Obviously, make fast hands baseline, bring some of the black and gray traits that are marked up to compete with their alternatives and stuff. I really don't know. Some of the things need reworks. I'd love to see literally everything in the game reworked, but I understand that words are easy and works hard, and stuff takes time, so that's not really a possibility, especially with End of Dragons. But I'm excited. You excited? What are you excited outside of Warrior for End of Dragons?
Oh boy.
World versus World?
Yeah, most likely World v World, because that's like the only game mode that I really care about now.
It's tough. You gotta set your own goals and priorities and stuff. But yeah, I get that. It's the one I like.
One thing to mention on the whole Warrior topic is, I think the problem with Warrior, it's that it's constrained by its lack or just ability to play differently. Warrior has probably the least versatility out of all classes. You really are hard stuck on, at least in PvP, you're stuck on that kind of just side node role. And then when you transfer Warrior into other game modes, even in World v World, it's sure, you can roam on Warrior, but when you run a Warrior in Zergs, it's kind of like, it's outside a bubble. That's all you're there for, right? I feel like Warrior's presence has started to diminish. Like the last time Warrior's presence was felt, that was at least probably in the dungeon meta when you ran banners. I think Warrior still is present in, like, I guess, like, quote unquote meta fractal groups. At least I've seen them around.
Yeah, it is. No, you still take banners, you still do damage. It's like the banners are a whole separate thing, because
It's just when you compare it to other classes, like, when you look at other classes like Ranger, you look at Ranger, Mesmer, Guardian, those classes have not only, the potential to be played in, as support, but they're also the potential to be played as like very hard DPS classes too, and even some of the other ones, I haven't even mentioned engineers, like also another example, perfect example. They're better. I don't want to say they're
Engineers
better
nuts.
than warriors.
I would say
And
they're a better warrior. I'm just gonna say
they're
that.
a better warrior, sure, at least in PvP, but they fulfill multiple roles through all other game modes. I think warrior
It's
just
like they're
lacks that
afraid to
ability.
give warrior stuff.
Even Thief is coming out to, they're giving Thief a heal spec, or at least seems like a heal spec.
See
I don't
what
know
it ends
exactly.
up being.
Yeah, it seems, regardless, it's more on it clearly they want to give it more of a support role. Now, I'm sure there's going to be somebody out there coming up with a very aggressive like playstyle with it that can do damage. I mean, that's the beauty of Thief.
Don't
But
get
they're
me
even
started
coming
on
out.
Spectre. Spectre's so bullshit.
Regardless, at the end of the day, they're coming up with new ideas for it. Warrior has been
Yeah.
stuck in that ook do damage. They've never, the heal warrior thing was kind of the coolest thing. I came back for that season and I thought it was kind of
Yeah,
fun.
Warhorn,
because
Shout Heal Warrior.
I don't know, for me that kind of spiced up the meta. Like, I mean, it didn't spice up the meta. I think the meta still remained the same, but it made PvP games more interesting because you don't see it coming.
Yeah. It's like, oh, there's a warrior. He's gonna do damage to me. Why can't it? Why isn't he dying?
But now they don't have anything
They
to
don't.
kind of outside of just if you're not running Spellbreaker and PvP and even World v World, that's pretty much it. You're mostly left with just a very, very glassy Berserker build. That's it.
And I would argue the reason Spellbreaker even worked, especially at POF launch when all the discipline cooldowns were 30 seconds, wasn't even because Spellbreaker itself was that powerful. It was just because Warrior, like, the thing with Warrior, and this is sort of something that I feel like ANET takes a little bit too much stock in. I feel like if they buff like 2 things on it, everyone complains it's overpowered, and then if they nerf 2 things on it, everyone complains it's underpowered. But they nerfed way more than 2 things with that big nerf patch, so it's just been like poop for the past 2 years. I don't know, I think a really good example of that are like all of the damage mitigation cooldowns. So they, increased Defiant, or I don't know if they actually touched Defiant Stance, but they increased obviously Endure Pain, they increased Balance Stance, they increased all of the auto trigger ones, which were a big part of Warrior, Defy Pain and
but
Last
they
Stand.
did that throughout all other classes.
I know that, but
a lot of
it's
other
so
classes.
important on this class. That's the thing, because it has so many of those things, right? Like, all of Warrior's stability came from that auto-trigger trait, and they took that away, and now it has no stability, so it's like, what does it do? I guess it has Rampage. People still run Rampage. Rampage is good. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm really excited going forward. I wish ANET would take some stock in the idea that maybe Fast Hands and Discipline as a whole is way too overbalanced. I wish they would take some stock in the fact that maybe some other trait lines could do some other things if you spec'd into them, like Tactics. Like, pretty much all of the traits suck in it. It's kind of frustrating, except for the one that people take it for. Like, Specialist is okay.
Here's the thing with Warrior, I think they kind of dug themselves a grave when they, just Fast Hands started being a thing.
But it's always been a thing, though.
It's always been a thing for sure, but here's the thing: you can't really get rid of it because
you can't.
One, it's a unique way of playing a class, right?
And it's very cool, and it's very fun, and that's what I want them to focus on.
Yeah, making it baseline will be very overpowered because then you can start bringing newer traits into conversations, and then you can make some really.
You really think so?
I don't know. I
Because
can
everything
definitely
already
see the
runs it.
potential of it.
And the other trait line. So here's the thing with when I was suggesting that they do that, and I know that's kind of an egregious thing to suggest, but Warrior, as we've discussed, is almost it's pretty much bottom of the barrel as far as viability goes in a lot of game modes. For doing Warrior things. There's other things as we've talked about, like Side Node Necro or Scrapper or whatever it is, Engineer, that do Warrior's job better. Especially in PvE, there's why would you bring a Warrior when you can bring a Dragon Hunter and do 5k more damage, or DPS. I think that all of the trait lines, Strength and Discipline included, if you take Fast Hands, and you just make it baseline, I think that Warrior is so bad right now that would effectively be a really easy band-aid fix solution for them to not have to balance the rest of the class. I really think it would bring the power level up enough so that you could take strength and defense or strength and tactics, or maybe even you don't give it like full fast hands baseline, you give it like, 80% recharge base or something, just something so that when you take discipline, it gives you the extra damage booster, it gives you burst master, it gives you warrior sprint, which are really good traits. Like warrior sprint is nuts. It's amazing to me that it's not a minor. I say this in the paper. It gives you bonus damage, it gives you the only movement speed warrior has outside of Bladesworn, it gives you curing immobilize on movement skills, which is like, I would say, almost defines warrior playstyle in PvP more than like the fact that you can't immobilize them really than like, anything else other than fast hands. Like it's so good at, even if you take this trait away, and everything else is so bad except for strength, that I honestly think that it would add a lot of viability to a lot of builds. I really don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe it would be overpowered.
I wouldn't. I don't want to say it would be overpowered, but I do think it will put warrior at least in a different spot. It would just take a bit of time for some people to crunch some numbers or play around with some builds.
Right, and that's honestly, even if it's the bane of my existence, even if Firebrand gets buffed or something, or even if Longbow gets 1200, 12,000 range on Ranger or something, I want ANET to be unafraid to try things because of whether it's because of their release pipeline or because they're afraid of another COVID 2.0 happening or whatever it is at this point, they seem. And obviously, this is speaking from a place of frustration that we haven't really gotten balance patches in the past 2 years. They seem unwilling to just try stuff to make stuff fun. They seem very willing to try stuff to make things unfun, which baffles me, like taking Chronomancer, the ability to just shatter without clones away, or taking a dodge on Mirage away, or taking Soul Beast pet things away without actually addressing, this is a separate podcast and a separate discussion, but those things really made those classes unfun without addressing the problems that existed with Soul Beast or the problems that existed with Mirage. Like, obviously it was bullshit that Mirage could dodge in place. Giving it one dodge doesn't fix that. It just makes the class pretty much feel like poop to play. Same thing in your case when you were talking about like how when they took the pet swap on Soul Beast away, the way to fix that wasn't to do that. It was to make it like either like. Not either, but like one example would be like when you killed the pet, when you absorbed it, you either took damage or you couldn't absorb it when it was dead or something like that. That wasn't, so there was counterplay. The way to fix it wasn't so you just couldn't swap pets in combat. Because, how'd that make you feel, Juice?
Awful. But
yeah,
I understood.
It was like poop.
Understood.
I do too, for the Mirage thing. But those
It made sense.
It makes sense, but it's not the best way to do it, is the problem. Like, Warrior balance as it is right now makes sense in quotes because there's still one viable play build out there. But, you look through these trait lines, and there's so much black stuff in here. There's so much, and their weapons, their weapon skills. We talked about how longbow's bad, how offhand sword's bad. No one uses offhand mace. No one uses main hand mace. Like, all of these things are just bad because they've just taken away so much from this. It's like one thing on Warrior gets overpowered, and then it's just like, nope, this is too much. Nerf it into the ground. I don't know. I'm excited for Bladesworn. You got any final thoughts?
I'm trying to think. I've always, to me personally.
Here, let's start with this. Say what you're gonna say, and then I got a question for you.
Sure. I always wanted to see, Warrior. So this is the thing, like you say Warrior is bad, but in my opinion, I don't think Warrior is bad. Warrior has always been consistent at what they do. I don't think Warrior's ever been bad. It's just other classes have gotten better, and they can do what Warrior does better. I don't think that makes it necessarily bad. I don't think that makes the class
You have to
bad.
compare it to something, right?
It's just, they would need to either buff Warrior or nerf other things, which I don't know what's the easier answer here. Which one is easier to solve?
The fun answer is.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, so, getting into the future in a little bit again, I want to ask you what role, at least in, let's go with PvP, because PvE, it's just going to do damage, right? Whatever form that damage takes as Bladesworn, it's just going to do damage. What would you like to see for PvP in World vs. World Warrior going forward? I'll start with this because I've thought about it a lot. So, as far as Bladesworn, I actually really hate it. I love the Gunsaber skills, and I hate the sit and wait playstyle. Not because I hate that playstyle, actually, but because that's literally something they said they didn't want to do on Deadeye, and then they just gave it to Warrior. And I really hate Lush Forest, not because I hate the trait. I actually love the trait, but because the way they've implemented Lush Forest now, it's just... basically it makes it so you don't want to use past your first charge of anything, because you want to always have that first charge to refresh all the other skills. So, essentially they took, with Bladesworn, sit and wait Deadeye, fixing it, and Mantra Guardian, or Mantra Firebrand, where you couldn't use past your first charge of your mantras, which they said was also bad, and they just put them on one class, and they put them on my class, and that's frustrating as all heck. It's like, what are you doing, ain't it? Like, I think Bladesworn will be good just because it'll be something different, but it just seems like whoever's designing Warrior just doesn't either play Warrior or care. You know what I mean? And that hurts to feel like that.
I don't know how Bladesworn's gonna fit in PvP, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't know anything about the spec, but when I was playing, I was even playing the new Guardians. Like, I was still playing Dragon Hunter, roaming around. It's kind of hard, I don't know. I feel like the animations are very telegraphed, just like the Rev ones as well.
You can jump Dragon Trigger.
I saw some videos of that, but I feel like it's very hard to get hit by their abilities.
Yeah.
So no, I can see its potential in ranked games. I'm sure there's you can easily come up with a fun spec, that you can just log in, play, and have a good time. I'm sure there's potential for that, but I don't think it'll ever. If the higher you get, I don't think you can carry a team. I don't think it's possible to see much of it. I'm sure this could probably age very well. Who knows?
I heard a couple.
Is gonna go
right. I heard a couple people saying team fighter, just because if you get that one Dragon Trigger off and you hit up, everyone in a team fight, you essentially won that team fight.
But here's the thing: if you're facing an enemy and they're running a Bladesworn,
you kill that first.
Wouldn't that be your primary target? Sure, if you're running with a Necro and stuff like that, it's a different conversation. But that's the difference between team play and ranked, right? In ranked, don't shut down whoever's the biggest threat. So and you're probably more coordinated at shutting down a person. Also, if you're playing Bladesworn, you're probably going to be running a very offensive. Actually, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're running something else other than the Berserk Amulet, which already probably makes it pretty squishy.
Yeah, it's weird, especially with the Amulet balance, where Warriors they can take that Berserk Amulet because they have that higher toughness and health pool, but not really. You know what I mean? They used to be Warriors' thing, and now it's just kind of gone by the wayside because everything else is also tanky as balls.
It's gonna come down to let them release it and see how it goes. But
yeah, I'm excited, but it's weird. What I would like to see, I would love this. That one trait that no one's gonna take on Bladesworn that heals you, wherever it is, Great Sir, Immortal Dragon. That essentially duplicates Unyielding Dragon, because Unyielding Dragon gives you Might now, and Might heals you because you're taking Strength, because, of course you are. I would like them to see them either put on one of those two traits just an unlimited target cap on Dragon Slash for World vs. World. Just if you get the maximum charge, you can hit everybody. So essentially Zerg fights are like this. Push, 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 stab, empower. Stop the Bladesworn! Stop the Bladesworn! Okay, push, push, push.
Nah, there's no way they're not gonna put a cap on that.
It'd be so fun.
Sure.
It'd be so fun.
Even with Will Bender, I think they're gonna put a cap on a lot of their even core abilities, because
the cleave stuff.
Yeah, they hit way too. I don't think there is even a cap on, for example, I forgot the trait, but the Aegis trait. Yeah, permeating Raz, that's 5. The one. Oh,
no,
that is
Shattered Aegis is 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shattered Aegis 5. Okay. That's good. Yeah, I don't know. I was watching some videos of some people going into Zergs as a Willbender, and they're just doing a lot of damage.
Well, it's the problem, right? It's great, but it's weird when ANET especially with things like tormenting runes, and that's a whole video that I'm doing too. It's weird when they'll like allow things like tormenting runes and purity of purpose and permeating wrath to exist with no cooldown, and then they'll do things on Revenant, like they'll introduce things that have either a very low cooldown or very like negligible cooldown that aren't really that strong, and then they'll put a cooldown on them. Where is this trait? I think it's called Brutality, where they introduced it, and within like an hour of it being released, I had already made a build for it. They nerfed it because it was... Wow, I'm looking through this like I'm an idiot. So, it's Brutality, there it is. It removes stab, you know, 1 stack of stab when you have a quick, when you have quickness. And that's a really cool trait for World versus World. But it's negligible because it has a cooldown now, so it's like... I feel like ANET really needs to either pick one and do the, like, 1 second ICD on everything thing and then balance the numbers around that, or just no ICDs, you know what I mean? Which is fun! It's fun! It's fun to be able to run into a Zerg and just be like, I'm a Willbender, suck it. You know what I mean? I don't know. We'll see. We'll definitely see. But yeah, this was the first of the sort of Box of Nails Core Teardown Warrior podcast. I don't know if we're going to do any more of these before End of Dragons, because I kind of want to see what stuff shakes out, and I want to get these edited videos out. Got a lot on my plate, working on getting hoodies for the guild and whatnot. Anyway, I've been Pseudo. This is Juice. This is Tyria Tribune, the channel. Check us out. There's also a website for any of the previews for all of the Gem Store stuff. And yeah, thanks for joining us. Juice, you got any final thoughts?
Not at all. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Let us know what you thought of this down in the comments. Love it or hate it. Got suggestions. I do actually read them, so I appreciate it. Alright, take it easy. Peace.